The midterm.
Yes.
Okay, at this point, my decision still same. Using pen, write and scan. Okay, but because it's a short answer question.
Thank you, sir.
So, okay, the midterm will be a modular form. So it means that I will send first question, then you download, you answer. You can answer using the same on the exam question itself. We can provide space for you to answer, and because it's a short answer, okay, it's short answer exam. Mostly, maybe one or two questions. It's like a bit long essay, but mainly short answer questions, testing your understanding. Okay, sometimes can be very specific also. Relatively, yeah, you can ask opinion. Also very technical as well. So try to get a good understanding of what we discuss. It's not so difficult, but it's just that you have to read the notes. Okay. It's a closed exam, right? So that you have to be ready for the exam. Because I mean, I trust you. So that's why I think the mode is a modular mode. So once the time is up, so you'll be given time to submit. If I release the second question, okay, that will go to, because there are 3 main questions for 1.5 hours. It's like 20 minutes answering, or maybe 25 minutes, 5 minutes. So you must make preparation. Make sure that your connectivity is good. You're in the right place. Okay. If you use prepaid and all that, so make sure you have all the data load, right? Okay. Not long. It's just 1.5 hour. Okay, I think it's done before, isn't it? Right, and submit. Because this one is a essay, it's not really technical in the sense of calculation. Okay. So at this point, I prefer this way. Okay, no, let me see. Okay, no other questions. Let me present the any question? Yes. Oh, what is that? Brother Yasir. Thank you, or Tai Chi. Which one? Thank you or Tai Chi. All right. So today, all right, I'm joking. Okay. So today the topic is public-private partnership. Okay, it's part of a procurement process. Okay, it's an extension of the previous class. Just that maybe definitely PPP, the scale is quite big, big scale type of projects, and it takes also the duration of time. It's longer than 1 year. Okay, so the government working with the private sector, so they have a platform. So one of them is public-private partnership. Okay, and we'll see examples. Okay, these are examples of IIM Medical Center. Right, it also was built under the PPP platform. Later we'll see there is what we call it PFI, Private Finance Initiative. Okay, it was shared that way, so I believe so. It was under PPP. Okay, and okay, we look at the principles and then make comparison between procurements, conventional procurements, PPP, privatization. Then look at the example also. Today I made some update. And then we look at specifically on PFI, an example of PFI. Yeah? And lastly, issues of PPP for accountants. Okay, of course, the source of this lecture is multiple source. I think you may not get this in the textbook. Okay. Anyway, but I think it's good for you to know. I mean, because you are now already finally students. Okay, and these are a very important scheme of basically the partnership between public and private sectors to provide public services. Okay, principles of adopting PPP, socio-economic impacts. Okay, so government can increase the investment in public service, okay, facilities, and not only that, it can also, later on see, because normally government, okay, the Malaysian government or in general, okay, so they want to prepare the countries forward, okay, for the new opportunities. So this also can be undertaken through this mode. Value for money and cost saving to the government, okay, because to a certain extent, sometimes it's a sharing of costs between public and private sector, and the fact that because some of these projects are very specialized projects, okay, or specialized services. Later on, we see oil and gas, for instance. Of course, we have multinational companies are very good in that, and then of course can bring in value for money. Quick delivery of the project and service enhancement, okay, because basically the services are provided by the private sector. In terms of scope, if you look at running the facilities, is undertaken by the private sector. Okay, and at the same time, in the same building, government providing the public services. I think this good example will be the hospitals. You look at the hospitals in Malaysia. I think the only public service is the building, and then the service of the doctors and the nurse. But the rest are all managed by private sector. So that's how the level of partnership. Increased level of accountability, efficiency, and effectiveness. So of course they have to develop the accountability mechanisms. So with that, with the right contracts, the scope, enforcement, okay, they can achieve efficiency and effectiveness. Differences between conventional procurements, PPP, and privatization. Okay, so I think these three comparison, conventional, okay, what we have discussed previously in the previous class. PPP for this class, privatization is basically the ownership of the entities will be transferred to the private sector. Okay, or that's the basic understanding of privatization. But in Malaysia, privatization have a different stage. Okay, I think mostly the privatization is the conversion of government entities from departments or statutory bodies to companies. Okay, and then all these companies, if you look at GLC, GLC is a result of privatization that's happening in 1980s, 90s. It's an ongoing process. If government had a platform where an entity can be commercialized and privatized, they will do that. And at both levels, at the federal as well as at the state level. Okay, let us quickly look at this comparison. Procurement are funded directly via public budget, okay, through conventional. Under PPP, funding via private financial resources without public sector's explicit guarantee, okay, in the right form, okay, because sometimes, of course, it's still under the private platform, but there is a government guarantee, okay. Funding via private financial resources with an implicit or explicit public sector guarantee, okay. So that is very obvious. Public sector guarantee here means if the private sector or the private sector cannot generate enough revenue and enough income, then the government have to fill up the gap, okay. And if anything happens, so still government will will be financially responsible. So it's a kind of contingencies, liabilities in that manner. Okay, second, immediate impact on public sector financial position because of use of public fund. And the PPP impact on public budget spreads over the duration of concession. Okay, so take in the case of PFI, so basically the government have to pay like a rent over the periods of concession. If it is 30 years, okay, over 30 years. In the case of toll, okay, all these expressways with tolls, and then there's no direct impact on government money. Okay, privatization, no impact on the level of public sector expenditures because GLC, they are managing their own or private company. Another, you can see privatization is basically even the ownership will be transferred to the private sector. Okay, for instance, like some of the government entities have been transferred to the major listed companies in Malaysia, other than GLC. Risks are entirely borne by public sector in the case of conventional procurements. Okay, risk here can be all, can be operational risk, can be financial risk. Okay, operational risk is just that the facilities, the procurement project cannot deliver as it should be. If it is financial risk, maybe the cap of the expenditures. It's just that it can go beyond budgets. Right, under PPP, risks are allocated to parties which can manage them more efficiently. Right, if it is operational risk, should be transferred to the private sector. Risks are entirely borne by the private sector. Okay. Fourth, conventional, extensive public sector involvement at all stages of project life. Okay, even the outsourcing. Basically, if you look at awarding the contracts under the tender process, so big projects, right? So the government basically will monitor the progress because they will have to certify the payments, make sure that the private suppliers, they can deliver as what is being prescribed in the contracts. Public sector involvement under PPP, public sector involvement is through enforcement of pre-agreed KPIs. Okay, of course, because now it's in the private hand, and even financing and operation by the private companies. So for government to pay the rental or what is being agreed on the payments of the services, then of course it's based on KPIs between the contracting parties. Of course, in this case, government and the PPP entities. Right, privatization, government act as a regulator. Okay, so because it's not directly involved in the operation as well as in the funding of the project or the activities, then government will enforce. Okay, of course there are certain. I think the case of energy, in the case of water, okay, I think there's so many that government basically act as a regulator. Okay, the fifth one, relationship with private contractor is short term. Okay, maybe up to the completion of the project, and then there is handover. Once there is handover of the project, so basically the entity, the facility is owned by the government. Okay, become the government asset. Okay, right, like KLIA Airport, for instance. Okay, just as an example. If it is at the agency level, okay, I give the example of IUM Hospital is under PFI, that one is under PP. Okay, but generally, if it is tender, once the facilities is provided, let's say there is a development of a army camp, right? So once the project is completed, and there is an handover, commissioning and handover. So once it's in handover, then the ownership to operate and to maintain is basically in the hands of government. Okay. Of course, there is a grace period where in 18 months that the private contractors, or maybe based on the prescribed contracts, that the private contractors still have to make sure that the buildings, the facilities, okay, up to the standards. Okay, they still have to monitor. Under PPP, long duration relationships with private contractors because of concession period. because if they use their own financing, later on we'll discuss this a bit more detail. Privatization, long duration relationship with private contractors. Okay, lastly, applicable for project with high socioeconomic returns and those justified on strategic considerations. Okay, maybe like hospital, for instance. It's quite difficult to justify hospitals under other platform because particularly on the privatization because it's the importance to for socio-economic development and because conventional is also traditional. So traditionally that is the procurement process. So PPP is basically a continuation to improve a procurement process. Okay, so that more projects can be developed through with the PPP. Okay, because government facility resources or budget is limited. Okay, you know that mostly development budget is like 10 to 20% of the total budget. Okay, and then of course there is another mechanism, the use of PPP, and also because of the massive. Later we'll see example of oil and gas, because the massive capital expenditures. Okay, the government cannot afford to share even at the beginning of it. Right, privatization, PPP and the privatization applicable for project with commercial viability. Okay, this is also applicable for privatization. Commercial means, they can generate its own revenue. Okay, and from that revenue, they can basically finance the project as well as the operation. Okay, example of PPP, petroleum drilling in Malaysia. Right, so this is not new. If you see this, then of course PPP mechanism is not recently. I think if you look at petroleum drilling, particularly more obvious in Malaysia since 1980s, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, with the establishment of Petronas. So in that sense, in that level, so major players, major companies like Shell, ASO, right, British Petroleum. So all basically the players in the industry to drill, to explore as well as to process the petroleum. So you look at this, they have this mechanism, production sharing contracts. Okay, so the sharing of costs, profits, and royalties. Okay, so out of 100% of the revenue, 70% basically covering costs. 10% is because petroleum is a federal government asset, right? But in any case, there is a sharing. Royalties, these are the sometimes the state government that has more money on the because the petroleum being drilled in their respective state. Okay, like Terengganu and Sarawak, so they request for more share. Okay, so if you look at this, basically the margin to share is quite slim, and at the bottom there is profit sharing. So profit sharing is between tax, contractors, and Petronas. So a big chunk of that is basically with, but it's only 20%. Almost 8% is basically petroleum tax that can go to government. And so if you look at and then with Petronas. If you look at the cost, so I think one thing you have to recognize the cost. This cost is basically sharing, sharing with the private sector. Of course, they can cover that through the revenue. And the federal royalties is like a fixed cost for the from this drilling of petroleum. Okay, I think this one is over time in terms of the sharing of gross revenue, right? I think if you look at the cost, it's becoming more expensive to drill the oil, the petroleum. And then if you look at in terms of partnership between the partners, I think quite reasonable. Okay, even at the end of that, I think this one is through years, over the years, but I couldn't show that the year, but just that the margin is become slim, even with the Petronas. But government, of course, they receive profit sharing grant as well as tax. Okay, so that's why a big chunk is basically for the government, which is quite fair. But it's just that the drilling cost is becoming more expensive. I think one of the reasons, possibly, if I'm not mistaken, was the easy the easy oil that is been can extract easily has been basically exhausted. What is left is basically in the difficult areas, okay, where more costs need to be incurred to extract the oil. I think that's what I was made to understand that way. Okay, but anyway, in this example to show, okay, how PPP can be used as a platform to provide the services. Right, these are just the explanation, okay, in terms of costs, and but the idea is to increase public services. So once with this platform, the money that okay, in the form of tax as well as in the form of profit sharing, the government, the federal government, state government can benefit. Right, yes.
Just now, can you go back to the slide example of PPP?
Okay.
Petronas drilling. Just now you say Petronas is GLC, and example for the privatization. Do you mean PPP also apply in privatizations? Since you say the Petronas is example of PPP, I get confused there.
Oh, okay. Because Petronas is wholly owned by government. Okay, so it's basically a public sector entity. Petronas is unique in the sense it is, of course, it's GLC, but it has a twin role. One is to extract the oil. Okay, the other is it's also enforcing the Petroleum Act. Okay, so it's a unique entity. But our focus definitely is the PPP, public-private partnership. In a very general discussion, when I highlight this on the petroleum, is basically to show you that when the public and private sector they cooperate to improve. Because if we use only government funding, they'll not be able to provide these services. They'll not be able to extract petroleum. Okay, because of the involvement of multinational companies like ESO, like Shell. Okay, in the beginning, of course, now Petronas itself is very big, a very big company. We're talking about in 70s and 80s. Okay.
Yeah, so basically PPP is also applied in GLC.
PPP is applicable in GLC. Okay. At this point, our focus is on the government. If it is GLC, procurement by GLC is under privatization. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I just show this is basically to show you that this is not new, and then the capacity of PPP to to take to basically develop public services, right? But the focus of discussion PPP here is basically between government agencies, government agencies, and the private sector.
Okay.
And GLC is I don't want to include here because the manner that was done is basically very close to the private sector entities. It's just that government, okay, I think if you look at here, government act as regulator, more on that. And of course, in the regulator here also mechanism to because not GLC, okay, like Petronas or let's say like TNB or because if they want to enter into major project as well, they need government approval. Okay, so in that sense. All right.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Somebody
yes.
want to end the class.
Okay. Only one. All right. Come back, huh? Okay, another example. This is new, all right? Okay, this is international scenario on PPP. Okay, NASA working with SpaceX and Boeing to send a new rocket. commercial rocket to the ISS. Okay, so you can check this, the website. And this is happening this morning. Okay. Okay, you can have a look here, but I just want to share. I mean, these are basically explaining the PPP platform. NASA is government agency. And then now we watched, oh, hold on. We watched the launching. I think it's nice. It's happening this morning. Okay, hey, where? This one is my NASA. Okay, I think just take a bit of it, not all. I just, maybe we just look at the launching. Yeah, this when the counting, the countdown. Okay, we take the countdown. Anyone watch this morning?
No,
Okay, right. Where is that? Okay, I think they already almost reached the ISS. Maybe it's already there. And this one is a website by NASA. I think they're monitoring. Anyway, I just want to highlight, the level of partnerships and how that very useful. Okay, in terms of exploration technology, and so that's what government should do, isn't it? Because the benefits of exploring the space, and then those technology will be used in for, I think we all getting benefit of this kind of exploration. Right? Okay, as an example. Okay. Yes.
Someone's waiting for you.
Oh, okay, really. Wow. Why, should be early, okay? Everybody should be early for this class. Otherwise, we miss the discussion. Okay, let me continue. Right, so you can see, it's basically the partnership between, NASA and the partners. I think in this case, what is the difference between this launching? Generally, launching is by the astronauts and through ISS, but this time is they call it commercial, towards commercial type of in the way that there is a direction toward space tourism. Okay, the law improvement. Okay, that's also in the platform of PPP. It's not only borne by the government, okay, but it's a partnership between NASA as a government agency with the private sector, SpaceX and Boeing. You know that Boeing is a major plane makers in the world, isn't it? There are only two. One is Boeing, the other is aeroplane makers in the world. What's the other one? Boeing and brothers, sisters? Sisters, brothers? Airbus. Yeah, Airbus. So only two. So you can see the entire, to support the airline industry, aviation. So only two for commercial, main commercial airline manufacturers, okay, aeroplane manufacturers, which is Boeing and Airbus. Okay, now we move on to private finance initiative. Okay, that has been launched. I think initially was for our discussion, it was the origin is from UK, and then in Malaysia also very soon after that being adopted in Malaysia. So PFI is is kind of sharing, but in this case, government pay rental. But I think this one is directly the change from the conventional procurement, okay, where what we discussed, right, and then move on to PFI. Okay, but of course it's still in the platform of public-private partnership. Okay, so under PFI, if you look at this, the first circle there, the private sector. So what will the private sector do? Design, build, finance, and operate the facilities. Okay, let's say we take an example of hospital. Okay, as I show you, the earlier photo is on the IUM hospital. Okay, so it was built under PFI. Then this is what happened. The private sector, they design, build, finance, and operate. So under traditional procurements, okay, design, finance, and operate by the government. Okay, so the private sector entities, contractors only build. They only build. Okay, and then they receive their payments finished. But in this case, under private sector, DBFO, all of them is under the private sector. Okay, so so for the facilities, definitely, yeah. Okay, second, the contracts, okay, is still continue in the form of concession, just like other concession before. Okay, where the government pay giving the concession is a private sector, is a public sector assets, but in the hands of private companies. Okay, so in this case, long-term contract of normally 25 to 30 years. The idea of long-term contract is, I think, is quite obvious, because all costs to develop the facilities is by the private sector. Definitely, as a private sector profit-making entities, they have to recover their investment and to achieve their ROI. So that's why the long-term contract for them to maintain, to get the income from the projects or from the facilities require a long-term, okay, 25 to 30 years, okay? And it's quite long actually, okay, but because that's why generally it's about mega projects, mega projects. But even I think quite a small scale project also can use, okay, like the development of the campus or the buildings of the campus also can be done under PFI. Okay, the role of the private sector make regular payments known as unitary charge. Okay, these are in the original form, the term used, a unitary charge. Okay, unitary charge is basically because the government in this case is the client. Okay, the private sector is the service provider, the government is the client. That's why government have to basically pay for the services. When the contract expires, ownership of the asset either remains with the private sector provider or is returned to the public sector. Okay, these are the options in the contract. That at the expiration after 25 or 30 years, so there is an option of government can either take over or the asset will be remain in the private sector. So in the sense, it's like leasing as well. In that sense, it's like leasing as well.
Sir,
Yes.
I don't understand why the government need to pay the unitary charge to the.
Okay, I think it's easy. If you look at example, let's say hospitals. Okay, hospitals, there is building, and with the building, there is beds, full services. Because if you look at under private finance, they have to operate. Okay, they have to operate. Because building, once the completion, the construction is completed, then the building need to be used. Okay, it become operational. So there are utilities, there are elevator, a bed and all, right? So these are services that need to be compensated. Okay, one is they have to pay because of the construction costs. The other is because of the operation. So that's government have to pay. Of course, I mean, you can say that, okay, why government? Can customer pay? Yes, customer also can pay. There are projects that basically customers pay. Okay, not only public sector. But here, the initial form, right, in the planning and design is the government will pay as in the form of unitary charge. Okay, so this mechanism is basically based on the UK-based, UK-based PFI. Right? Agree?
Okay, sir.
Okay. These are types of PFI. Okay. Services sold to the public sector. Okay, that's one example. Delivered to DBFO. Financially freestanding projects. Okay, entirely financed and managed by the private sector. These are where the revenue can be covered from the customers, from the users, basically. Okay. So the construction of the facilities of the bridge. If you look at this example, second Severn Bridge. Okay, Severn Bridge here is basically between Cardiff and Bristol. Okay, so there are, I think the second Severn Bridge is new. Okay, so even the Severn Bridge you have to pay. It's just like toll. It's like toll. The difference is about toll, about the expressway. Okay. Okay, here, it's basically the project cost is financed by the private sector. So of course they have to recover their costs. And also when they operate, they need to get their returns. So that's the idea. But the service is public service. We talk about roads or bridges. Okay, number 3, joint ventures. Public and private sector works as a partner. Okay, private sector retain control. So this also can be done. Okay, important features of PFI. Okay, listen carefully. Okay, so why PFI? Okay, of course, in a way that when government launch this platform, definitely there must be improvement than the traditional procurements. Okay, the first one is service focus. Okay, so providing, let's say, hospitals. Then, of course, the services in the hospitals should be good in terms of facilities. Risk transfer. Okay, it should be optimum transfer of risk to the private sector. Okay, if you look at this, there is a comparison. They call it PFI. Cost of PFI should be lower than cost public sector comparator, PSP. So if you look at the bottom there, public sector comparator, what it means is basically the cost, if the public sector agencies or the government develop the facilities, how much would be the cost? Okay, as compared to if it is done under PFI. So to justify PFI project to proceed, so the cost should be lower. Okay, the cost to the government should be lower. Right, and then there should be optimum transfer. So in terms of operation and finance. Okay, performance basis for payment is based on performance. okay, both at the construction period as well as during the operation, providing the services. So the performance, how they can monitor, definitely the underlying of the performance is basically KPIs, okay. Let's say number of beds, and beds need to be maintained, okay. So as an example, so there is a maintenance, replacement. If you look at the buildings, okay, elevator, if you look at hospital, the cleanliness, make sure the design meet the standards as hospitals, okay. Ownership owned by the private sector, okay, quite obvious. The facilities owned by the private sector during the concession. Innovation in terms of design. Right, but at bottom also as an example of project-related risk, fluctuations of interest rate, completion of projects, okay, because it's construction projects, construction and operation cost overrun, which is what is being decided. But all this should be clearly prescribed or written as part of the contracts. Okay, PFI in Malaysia was introduced in 9th Malaysian Plan to enhance higher contribution to growth from the private sector and government-linked companies. Okay, as I mentioned that it was originated in the UK, and now I think it's adopted in Malaysia in the 9th Malaysian Plan. Okay, it's like 15 years ago. To enhance high contribution to growth from private sector and government-linked companies. Okay, I think when we discuss about public sector or government, we talk about years. 15 years is very short span of time, okay, to make a very big change. Because if you look at government generally, I think I like the idea of some, you know, you to compare about government infrastructure and their performance and their tradition and their history, okay. So like Egyptian, for instance, okay, their government is with the experience of 4,000 years, okay. The Iraqis, for instance, I'm calling now Iraqi. Any Iraqi student here? No, So anyway, but they have that civilizations go beyond 3 to 4,000 years. In the US, it's a new country. Okay, generally a new government. Okay, the country is basically independence or established over 250 years. Okay, as compared to other countries like in the Middle East. I think in the Southeast Asia, we all have a very old civilizations. Okay. Even go beyond Islamic period. Okay, so all these basically built on and have that level of a way of doing things, right? So of course, Malaysia as an independent state after the colonization is only 60 years, isn't it? Okay, so still pretty much. But if you look at the improvement for those of post-colonization, so our country has been, I mean, Malaysia as an example, have done a fantastic job. I think definitely also applicable to your country. Okay, and these are the ideas that we share from this class that definitely you in the future, those who are from different countries, okay, sharing of experience can be done, okay, and you can bring all these technologies or techniques or understanding to your country, okay, more enhancement. Because as we speak, I think different countries, they, basically sharing knowledge and experience. Okay, PFI will involve the transfer to the private sector, the responsibility to finance and manage capital investment and services, including the construction, management, and maintenance of public sector assets. So that's why if you look at the features of PFI in Malaysia, it's very similar to what is being done in the UK, right? In return, the public sector will pay the private sector in the form of lease rental payment. Okay, so in Malaysia, they don't call it unitary charge, they call it lease rental payment. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, it's a kind of leasing. Upon the expiry of the contract, the facility will be transferred to the government at no cost. Okay, I think this is quite different than the term in the UK, PFI in the UK. Right, so there is a unit in the Prime Minister office, okay, PFI Central Unit, comprised of Ministry of Finance, the EPU, and National with the ICU. Okay, and then the benefit to the government, PFI reduced the upfront payment for development projects, okay, unlike the construction. okay, where and then it can be basically breakdown over the concession period. PFI enhance quality and efficiency in public facilities and services, and also help to stimulate growth of the construction industry. I think during that time, because government, when it was introduced in 2007, 2006, okay, if I'm not mistaken, that time also there was a global financial crisis, right? So what will be the sort, because government cannot support construction industry. So I think that's why they adopt this mechanism. Because the private sector, they can get funding from the banking system. Okay, example of recent PFI projects, your ITM 6 new campus, IM teaching hospital. Okay, it was also mentioned the transport terminal in Gombak, I think under construction now, right? And others. Okay, issues of PPP faced by public sector accountants. Monitoring, I think I got this from, there was a conference. Monitoring long-dated and contingent obligations. Okay, because government that provide that guarantee, minimum revenue guarantee, support for government-linked financing institutions. Okay, so if the collection is not enough to cover the revenue as prescribed in the contracts, then government have to provide. Judging value for money, okay, because judgment. Calculating termination payments for debt and equity in the event of government default, concessional default, or force majeure, right? These are abilities that accountants need to develop, or competencies. Setting a reserve price for privatization, okay? Maybe you can use valuation or valuer, right? But in any case, I think the accountants, of course, you can use private sector experts, but in terms of their assumptions, all these need to be assessed. Do they use the right assumptions, okay? So that when it comes to valuations, then you can develop the right price. Okay, so those skills need to be developed. Valuing real estate and external costs, okay, when purchasing and clearing land, created and enhanced by infrastructure assets, how to handle unsolicited bids and negotiated contracts. Okay, so these are examples. Scope of PPP, extending the scope beyond development projects. Okay, I think this is what's happening. Even now, partnership with NGOs. I think that's a good idea. Not only for the commercially viable projects, but PPP, the partnership, not only with the companies, but with the private, with the NGOs to expand the level of services. I think the simple, the very successful partnership, I think with RELA. Of course, RELA, at the end, I think it's absorbed. Somehow government have more involvement. But if you look at the members of RELA, so I think there was a process to make them more professional. But when the recruitments, okay, you can increase the number of, I think at that point, there was one point where the crime rate in the country was very high. Then I think the initiative by the Home Ministry, okay, to work between police, army and RELA. I think the role of RELA at that time was enhanced. Then you can see today, I think they are, very important services, okay, in terms of to facilitate the general public, as well as including security. Okay, so I show you one more time our campus, Gombak campus, okay, it's part of procurement. Any question? Any question, brothers, sisters? Okay, Ion Hospital will be under PFI, but it's an example of PPP because PFI is part of PPP. Okay, PFI is part of its methods. Is one of the methods. under PPP. I mean, for this class, the discussion of PPP is very broad. It's basically the PPP is the idea of working with the private sector to provide public services. Okay, so that is a general definition when we talk about PPP. Any other question? Okay, if no question, then I will end this presentation. Got it. Okay, thank you. And right, I think everybody is quiet. Then I will stop recording.